So my research deals with online advertising attribution, and it's easier to explain it by giving an example, so which most consumers actually know. So let's suppose you went on a brand's website, let's say Gap, and you put into a shopping cart a shirt, and you didn't buy the shirt, and you then continued surfing the internet. What would happen typically is that you'll start seeing ads for the same shirt again and again and again on every website. Now the question from the advertiser's perspective, which is Gap's retail, is if in the end the consumer did buy the shirt, how do you measure the effectiveness of each one of those ad exposures the consumer had? And this is called the attribution problem. Now, what most advertisers do today is they use something called last touch attribution or last click attribution. And the idea is very simple. If me as a consumer and I saw, let's say, 17 different ads on 17 different websites and then purchased a product, the last ad I saw before purchasing the product is going to get all of the credit for this sale. Okay? And what my research is trying to do is trying to determine, is this method efficient or not, and what is this impact of this method on different types of advertisers and different types of publishers in the online marketplace? In my research, what I try to say is I try to ask, is this last click method, which is used by the majority of advertisers, efficient? And why do they use this method? Because it's a bit counterintuitive. Why would they look only at the last ad that the person sees? And what I do is I compare two types of compensation schemes which are used online. One is paying for every exposure of an ad being seen, and one is paying just for every sale, like a commission on a sale that the publisher gets from the advertiser. So my key takeaway is that actually paying for exposures is more efficient and more profitable for the advertisers than paying a commission on sales, which is very counterintuitive. Most people think if you compensate a salesperson, you should pay them a commission only when they make sales and not when they show off work. But if you compensate a publisher, let's say Facebook, and you can pay Facebook for just showing the ads or actually generating sales, actually my key takeaway is that paying for showing an ads is more efficient and more profitable for the advertiser. The reason being is that if you have more than one publisher, let's say Facebook and Google are competing, what you will see is that there's going to be free riding on one of them on the other. So because of this last click method, they're going to compete among one another, etc. And one of them is going to claim they're going to be very, very, very efficient, although maybe they just showed the last ad, etc. So this is one key takeaway. The second one is that the last click method creates this competition between publishers that creates kind of a race to try and cheat the advertiser out of money, which is a bit strange. But the best way to explain it is just to try and think, what would you do if I told you that the last ad you show gets the commission? And you know a consumer comes to your website and there's a high probability the consumer is going to buy the product. And there's another consumer that comes to the website and you don't know if the consumer is going to buy the product. To which consumer will you show the ads? You will show the ads the consumer is going to buy anyway, and just bomb the consumer with ads to try to be the last one. So the other key takeaway is that when you're using last click or last touch methods, all of the measurements and all of the metrics you're getting are going to be maximized. You're going to get a lot of sales through a lot of channels and publishers, but maybe they didn't cause any of those sales. They just happened to be the last ones. So the first conclusion which surprised me was actually that paying for impressions or exposures is more profitable than paying for commissions. Because if you ask any advertiser online, they say, I want to pay only commission. I want to pay only when sales are being generated. And also this was my intuition when I started this research. And this was very surprising to find. And when I tell this even to managers and executives today, they basically don't believe me, although I can show them the math and show them it just works. The other surprising finding was that last click and last touch is not necessarily a bad method per se. Under some conditions, it increases the profits of the advertisers. But these conditions are quite limited. So if you ask advertisers, why do you use last click and last touch? Typically they say, it's just the best method I know so far, but I can show that if it happens that your campaign has these specific conditions, it's actually better to use last touch. And these conditions are very specific. It's typically when the first ad has the biggest impact. So there's a huge impact to the first ad and not that many to the other ones, and consumers don't visit the websites too often, then the last click method is very, very efficient. One takeaway you can take is that realizing that whatever attribution method you're going to use, over time, the publishers are going to learn how to maximize this metric. So even if you told the publishers, I'm going to compensate you according to who runs the fastest, someone will be the fastest runner, and they're going to be the best maximized method. So the idea is to try and sit down with the publishers and with the company you're using for doing attribution and try to think, is the model that they're using make sense, or does the model make sense to my consumers? And the other thing you need to do is you need to very carefully design an experiment and say, what would happen when using a new attribution method and what would happen without using it? You can't just move to a new method, see all of the metrics maximized, and say, oh, I just made more money, because probably this isn't correct. So one interesting misperception is there's these ads called retargeting ads. These are very specific ads that you only start seeing them after you put, let's say, a product in the shopping bag. In the industry, they believe these ads are very, very useful and actually are very good at reminding the consumer to come back to, let's say, Gap's website and purchase this shirt that the consumer was pondering to purchase. And my research shows that actually most of these retargeting ads are probably very inefficient and have no impact on the consumers. The only thing is that they're being shown last before purchase, because if a consumer went to a website and put something in the shopping cart, there's much higher probability the consumer is going to buy the product anyway. So if you start showing that consumer ads compared to consumers who just didn't visit the website and didn't put anything in the shopping cart, it would appear you have a huge lift, a huge increase in sales on those consumers you started showing ads to. But even if you don't show them ads, they will buy anyway. That's the point. So the misperception is basically, if you don't run an experiment and have a control group and says, on these consumers who visited my website, on half of them I do show ads, on the others I don't show ads, and only then I measure the difference, you're going to think that retargeting is a very, very useful channel. And typically they're not that good. Not that good. My method is unique in that I use game theory, and I actually did mostly an analytical and theoretical analysis of this problem, and only then I tested it on the data. All of the other research on this topic used a very empirical approach that they took a set of data, they ran algorithms on it, and they tried to figure out which publisher is better than the other one. What I try to say is what is the market using currently in measurement and compensation? What would be the consequences? And can we observe that in data? And through that, I basically found out that a lot of the empirical applications and measurements are basically incorrect. They assume that the market is efficient and behaving correctly, but if you do the theoretical analysis, you will see that you can figure out from the data if the market is inefficient or efficient, and in that case, it's not very efficient. The publishers are basically showing ads to consumers that will buy anyway. This is called adverse selection, or essentially trying to cheat the publisher. While the other empirical applications cannot differentiate between really showing ads to consumers who are influenced to consumers who just would buy anyway, and you kind of stick them with ads to get the commission. After working on this research, I started getting a lot of communication from companies saying, hey, Ron, this is very interesting, and there's this approach that you're suggesting, but there's at least 10 other companies that claim their attribution product is better or is the best. How do we compare? How can we even tell which one is better, etc.? So one idea I'm trying to push, and this would be probably with a few companies to experiment with, is to try to build a system where you generate advertising data and you try different attribution methods and you see which one just matches this company type of customer. And the reason this is interesting is that most attribution companies don't actually publicize, are not very transparent about the algorithms. They just say, we have the best algorithm, and if you give us data, we can give you the results, but we won't really tell you what's going on. So this approach, where you kind of test through many of them and kind of run a competition between all of them, is going to hopefully tell us which method works better or not, that we can understand this process much, much better.